Joe Otto.
That's what the Second Amendment was designed to do. If you're going to do something to nullify or take away my rights under the Constitution, come get it.
Max McGuire.
When you look at politicians on the left, they need to convince people that they are victims.
A resistance to the resistance. And now your hosts, Joe Otto and Max McGuire.
And welcome back to another edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. As always, my name is Max McGuire.
And this is Joe Otto.
And today is Juneteenth. It is June 19th. It is a day that, for the first time, is in the Google Calendar. Prior to this week, or the week prior, Juneteenth was not a holiday that the Google Calendar recognized. Apple calendars had recognized it, I think, a year prior. But it's a holiday that's kind of been thrust into the spotlight. And I guess we can talk a little bit about what the holiday represents, because a lot of people don't know. Personally, Joe, I've heard about Juneteenth. I knew it had to do with slavery and the African-American community. But as I'm researching it, Juneteenth commemorates the day, June 19th, 1865, when Union soldiers went into Galveston, Texas, and read out the Emancipation Proclamation. So the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed 1,001 days prior, but it had not reached Texas because Texas was in the Confederacy and Texas is kind of removed from the rest of the country. So it took a while for the Emancipation Proclamation to be read out and to go into full effect. So it's always been this kind of local holiday, a Texas holiday, but you're seeing a bigger push around the country to honor Juneteenth as this national holiday. And to me, I understand if someone wants to celebrate this, by all means, more power to them. But just to see the virtue signaling from corporations basically trying to make this a national holiday when it commemorates a single city learning about an executive order 1,001 days after it was signed, it seems a little silly to me. But anyone who wants to celebrate it, all power to them.
Well, I think it's just symbolism to some people, and it's propaganda to others, right? So you have media outlets and things that are creating propaganda and symbolism around it, and tying two unrelated things together and misrepresenting history. But beyond that, I don't think it's a problem actually having a conversation about Juneteenth or even honoring the day Juneteenth. I think that those that want to celebrate it, please celebrate it. But make sure you understand what it means. Right?
Yeah, the challenge is that the reason this was kind of thrust into the national spotlight over the past 2 weeks is that Donald Trump was originally going to have his Tulsa rally today on June 19th. And everyone said, how dare you, that's Juneteenth. And I had known about Juneteenth, but I'm like, wait a minute. You can't have a rally in Oklahoma because of a local holiday that originated in Texas? It just felt weird. And since then, since Trump was forced to move the rally and Juneteenth has kind of been propped up, there's now a bill in Congress to make a federal holiday. It just seems very forced. It seems very built by virtue signaling.
Virtue signaling. And this came down, we talked about it yesterday. Let's change the name of parks, take down statues, do all of this stuff. Let's change the window dressing just a little bit, make it look a little different. But underneath all of that, we're not going to address anything status quo. This is just typical of the media, and it's typical of the government to do that. It's typical.
And I'll tell you, we put out a video on our Conservative Daily Facebook page this morning, and Facebook labeled it as not fit for monetization, not advertiser friendly. And all I did in the video was go through the history of Juneteenth, explaining what it symbolizes, saying, yeah, it's a little silly that we have it's a holiday in New York when it's commemorating the reading of an executive order in Texas. It's a little silly, but fine, whoever wants to celebrate it. But Facebook's determined that is not advertiser friendly. They're probably going to do the same for this video as well. So we're going to get into this. We're going to get into the concept of systemic racism itself. So definitely hit that share button.
So let's stop.
Because Facebook is throttling this.
Let's stop for a minute and talk about sharing, right?
Sharing's
if you're
caring.
on this right now, share it. Facebook throttled us. They basically have weaponized technology. They've weaponized platforms. They've weaponized the media. They only want the message they want in the marketplace to be heard. That's it.
Yeah.
In essence, they're force-feeding you and force-feeding people around you a narrative. They're reprogramming you. They're telling you what you should and should not think. And if that's okay with you, don't share it. But you need to share it. If you agree that what they're doing is wrong, and you agree what they're doing is manipulating the people in the United States, share it. This is not China. We are not in China. We are in the United States.
Yeah.
So hit the share button, and let's have a conversation. You can also reach us by calling. You can call after we get into our opinions on this subject. You can call us at 888-441-1121, and we can have a conversation with you. If you're a troll, we will cut you off very quickly.
Yeah, you're going to cut off very quickly if you're a troll. I want to play this clip because this was in the United Nations this week. The United Nations just voted today to basically launch an inquiry into systemic racism in the United States with other countries. It was unanimous because, as you know, Donald Trump withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council because they're basically just anti-Israel puppets. But it was unanimous, 47-0, to launch this inquiry into United States systemic racism. Let's play a brief clip of this. This is cut 1.
Madam President, it is my honor to make this statement on behalf of the African Group. The African Group thanks you for the attention that your Bureau has paid to our request on convening an urgent debate on current violations of human rights that are based on racism, systemic racism, police brutality, and violence against peaceful demonstrations. During the resumption of this 43rd session of the Human Rights Council, the tragic events of 25 May 2020 in Minneapolis in the U.S., which led to the death of George Floyd, led to protests throughout the world against against injustice and police brutality that persons of African descent face on a daily basis in many regions of the world. The death of George Floyd, unfortunately, is not an isolated incident. Many other cases of persons of African descent having faced the MEM fate because of their origin and police violence exist. After the widespread indignation over this situation, it would be inconceivable that the Human Rights Council not deal with these questions, which are very relevant in accordance with its mandate. And this is why the African Group calls upon the Human Rights Council to organize an urgent debate on current violations of human rights that are based on racism, systemic racism, police brutality against persons of African descent, and violence against peaceful demonstrations, to call for an end to be put to these injustices.
So just so everybody knows, that was a voiceover of
it was a
him
translator.
speaking, translator.
He
So-
doesn't have a woman's voice. That was he basically speaks his native language, and then someone will translate it into one of the common tongues of the UN, in that case, English.
And those headphones he wears at the UN, there are translation systems and people that, as people talk in different languages, are then translated into his native language into his ears.
Yeah. I played that clip because I find it interesting that Burkina Faso is leading the charge to investigate the United States when right now in Burkina Faso there is a wave of ethnic violence that has displaced over 100,000 people, with one side trying to exterminate the other. And here he is talking about the need to investigate one death in the United States, which, as we mentioned in past episodes, it's tragic, absolutely tragic. But to me, this really does look like a case of the pot calling the kettle, for lack of a better word, black. Because if Burkina Faso wants to investigate crimes against humanity, which is what this inquiry is, when the UN Human Rights Council gets involved, that's what they're interested in investigating: genocide, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity. It seems really fresh to be coming from Burkina Faso,
Or coming from almost any nation on the continent of Africa. I want you to understand what really happens in Africa. In Ghana, right? In Ghana, there is ethnic cleansing and there is mass killings that happen, and they float the bodies down the river that goes all the way into Accra, right?
Yeah.
You go to Kenya, you have mass killings that happen between tribal conflicts. Killings.
These are things that do not happen in the United States.
No.
It's just
you're talking about. You're right. I mean, they're basically standing up there saying that, hey, this is a problem. And by the way, what happened to George Floyd is a problem. I have a video, Max, that I know that I can't put up on the page and get any sort of play with it, as far as Facebook will probably get really pissed off at us. But it is a picture. It is a video of about 50 or 60 police officers being shot, right? Being attacked.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And we don't talk about the opposite effect of what's happened and the fact that there are good police officers that get terrorized by criminals, right?
Yeah.
And that all day, every day, police officers have to put up with criminal. They're called on people when they're at their worst, right? And sometimes they're criminals. Like they've done, like the guy in New York that's been arrested 100 times in the last decade. 100 times he's been arrested, right? And he's still on the streets. And he's a sex offender. He's still on the streets. And police officers they can't understand how good people get attacked, but bad people keep being let out on the street.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I get it. I mean, the reason why we left the UN is it's a farce. The whole thing's a farce.
Yeah. Well, I listened to this Burkina Faso representative, and he mentioned that there's systemic racism in the United States. So I did a search to try and figure out what systemic racism means. And Mr. Producer, you can throw up image number 1. If you Google search systemic racism, and you actually type in systemic racism into Google, you'll see on image number 1, if we can throw that up, that the second result is Ben and Jerry's. That is not a Photoshop. That is not a joke. The number 2 result when you type in systemic racism is a page hosted by an ice cream company. So I want to put this up just to preface that and say that this is a very academic term, right?
Right.
Even with that,
we
one
have
of
somebody.
the most SEO'd results is Ben and Jerry.
So I want to bring someone in. We have somebody that's on the call with us that wants to talk about whether he does or does not believe that systemic racism exists. So who's joining us?
This is Kevin from Chicago.
Hey, Kevin. How are you?
Pretty good. I just want to touch on this topic because the only question you have to ask these people is, why are there so many people of color desperately trying to get into majority white European countries of European stock if they're so racist, if they're so hostile, there's so much oppression? Why are they desperate to illegally sneak in, to come in boats like you see what's going on in Italy and France? They'll risk their lives across boats to get in. I mean, if these countries are so racist and so oppressive to people of color, why are they so desperate to get into them? Of course, they say,
that's a good point.
Colonialism
That's a great question, because
other-
you see in the boats going into places like France, people who are literally fleeing genocide. They're fleeing ISIS when ISIS controlled territory. The notion that landing in France is worse off than living under ISIS or living under a warlord in sub-Saharan Africa. You mentioned, I would call it laughable, right? The fact that we have 1 million people a year on average coming into the United States to live here. If we were this racist wasteland where black people were just being killed on sight, where the left actually claims that black people are being killed for sleeping in their cars, you wouldn't see that many predominantly brown and black people trying to enter the United States. It's a great point.
Yeah, when you answer this question, they say, well, if you didn't come and invade Africa, it's always more. It's always further goalpost, and well, it's because you're colonials, you're colonizers. White people are colonizers, despite so many of these parts of Africa that weren't colonized. It's just one excuse after the other why they can't build productive civilizations. It's always someone else's fault, no personal responsibility. And when you have people like that, you can't reason with them. When they just constantly blame. You can't reason with people like that. You can't reason with people who want to just destroy the Constitution. It's like two polar opposites. Like back in the day when they had they're arguing about the Constitution, they may have been in disagreement, but they were all collective in the same goal. So it's like they had the same values. Now we don't have the same values. It's complete polar opposites. So we're in a hole that we got to dig ourselves out of. I just want to get you guys' thoughts on that regarding the immigration part. But thanks for taking my call.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for
calling in. Yeah, it's I think he's spot on with that, because whenever you call up that weakness of the argument, they say, oh well, it's the colonial nature of Europe, right? They keep going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, as opposed to just pointing out the flaw of the argument. Now, he mentioned the Constitution. There's no doubt in my mind that at one point we had systemic racism in this country. There was a clause in the United States Constitution that said slaves were only worth 3/5 of a person.
Right.
That was in the Constitution. That was a negotiation between two sides at the Constitutional Convention, and it was called the 3/5 Compromise. Okay. It said that slaves were only worth 3/5 of a human being. That is systemic racism. I completely admit that we had systemic racism in this country at one time, but that has now been stricken from the Constitution. So as we talk about this, and we have a clip to play in a little bit, I want to throw this up first before we keep talking about this, because I want to use the left's terminology. If we're going to go after and fight the left on this, I want to do it on their playing field. Let's do it on their playing field, as opposed to just saying whole cloth that doesn't exist, fight me. Let's use their playing field. Let's throw up image number 3. This is what the left claims systemic racism is. They say that there's 4 different types of racism. There's internalized, which is your internal beliefs. There's interpersonal, when you discriminate against individuals. There's institutional, which is those 5 institutions you see on that screen: housing, criminal justice, health, education, banking. And then there's systemic, which is the system itself perpetuating the racism in those institutions. So I want to use this terminology because this is, I still believe that this argument is fundamentally flawed. And Joe, you can disagree. You're free to disagree.
I do disagree. I do disagree. Now let me tell you something, right? You believe that systemic racism does not exist.
Yes.
I believe that systemic racism does exist. Put that back up. Put up that deal again.
All right, go ahead. Pick one of the 5 institutions to talk about.
Banking.
Okay. How is banking systemically racist?
Because banks adjust their fee structures to target minority and poor, mostly minority communities, to where it becomes a cash cow for them, right? So here I am.
Are you talking like payday loans, or are you talking about actual FDIC banks?
So let me tell you what I do know, because I've been involved on this side of the world as well. And you'll have, let's say, Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo, by the way, was caught doing this years ago, and it hasn't changed, and even though they were caught. So you could have a branch that would be located in a poor black community that they put a branch up, and you overdraw your account, right? First of all, they make it harder and or more expensive to get a loan. In other words, the average loan may be 4% in a neighborhood that is predominantly white or affluent. You will put a bank in that area. The bank rate may be 4%. You will go 20 miles the other way to a minority community, and the average interest rate, by the way, this is proven. This is not me making something up. That bank will charge the person with a 700 credit score that lives in that minority community 8%.
And you believe that that's systemic?
Hold on, it gets worse. You overdraw. Do I believe it's systemic? I absolutely. I believe it's racist at its core. I grew up in that environment. What's that? Oh, hold on a second. Time out. So
as you keep talking, let's just throw up image number 3 again. Keep talking.
So on the banking side, they target communities based on making billions of dollars, not just on the interest rate side. I'm sorry?
Who is they when you say they?
Banks.
I want to be very, very specific.
Banks. I can hit all 5 of these. I can hit housing, criminal justice, public health, education. We can
go through all 5.
All right.
And in all 5, I'll tell you why it's not systemic. But
okay, well, but here's the difference between living in that environment, right? Living it. In other words, being a part of the black community, which I am a part of the black community. I am ingrained in the black community. Right? There's not a place that I can walk that I don't feel fully comfortable, no matter what neighborhood it is, no matter where it is. Southeast LA. I could walk into Southeast LA, and I promise you I'm not going to get shot. Right? Well, I didn't get shot anywhere, but I feel comfortable there. I feel comfortable no matter where I go. Right? In the boardroom, not in the boardroom. But I've seen it. Like, I grew up very poor. And so growing up poor and growing up in a minority family.
Listen, no one's denying that. But
Hold
for
on,
something
time
to
out.
be systemic,
My-
what you're mentioning is
My
institutional
sister,
racism.
it is institutional.
Well,
Let me
well,
finish,
that's why-
Max. Let me finish. Okay. If you have a bank that goes into a neighborhood and their whole idea is I'm going to make more money by penalizing the people in that community, and we're putting it there because we know our profitability is higher because there's nothing they can do about it, right? That is racism. That literally by itself is racism, and it's a part of a system that's designed to hold them down, to take more from them. That's a truism. That's not me making it up. Now, I'm not telling you that everyone is racist. I'm telling you that there are ways that they prey upon black and minority communities. That is actually happening, right? You overdraw your account. Now, I've overdrawn my account by mistake a few times in my life. Actually, I went on vacation, came back. I had 26 NSF fees. 26, right? It was crazy. I didn't even know it was overdrawn. I had money in another account, right? I don't make a habit of it, and it's really never happened since then. But here's what happened when I walked into the bank. So Karen, I'm here because I have an overdrawn account. She goes, okay, let me take a look at your account. I keep a balance in that account. I go, look, I made a mistake. I had this money in this other account. I don't know why nobody didn't call me, right? Nobody even informed me, but I see I have 26 fees. The total on those 26 fees was like $700, right? She goes, no problem, Mr. Altman. I'm going to go ahead and waive all 26 of those fees. Doesn't look like we returned anything. We just charged you an insufficient fund deal, right? Now, that's me. Let's walk all the way over to the minority community.
Joe, you just said that you're a member of the black community.
I am.
So
but I'm not black.
So how is there institutional racism?
But I'm not black.
If you're okay,
I'm
so
not
you're
black.
part of the black. Okay.
I am a part of the black community, but I am white. But my dad is black, and we can go.
I want to pinpoint.
Hold on,
we have to get through all 5 of these. I want to pinpoint on them because I vehemently disagree with you.
No.
And
so my sister calls me and she's like, Joe, can I borrow some money? And I'm like, yeah. What you need some money? What do you need money for? Well, because my paycheck didn't get in until Monday. I was supposed to get in on Friday. And so my one bounced and another thing bounced. And so my sister is actually in the bank. And I was like, hey, no problem. I'll wire you in some money. Let me talk to the banker. So my sister is black. And I'm having a conversation with the banker. And I go, hi, how you doing? I'm Joe. I don't want to mention my sister because I don't want to put her on the spot, but
that's fine.
Just told me that she had these NSF fees. This is what happened. It looks like she has about $250 in NSF fees. Can you go ahead and waive those for her? And she goes, no. And I go, hold on, so time out. So I bank with you, and she banks with you as well. And I would like you to consider waiving her NSF fees. And my sister, I go, hey, by the way, have you had any NSF fees before? She goes, no, I haven't. Not ever at this bank, is what she said. And I was like, well, how long have you been with the bank? She goes, 3 years. And I was like, and I go, ma'am, she's been with the bank for 3 years. She made a mistake. The check was supposed to go in. She assumed it would go in Friday. It went on Monday. I'd like you, as a courtesy, to waive those $250. And she goes,
did they do it? Or did they do it?
They did not do it. They did not do it.
Okay, they didn't.
So do you know what I had to do?
And they didn't do it for you?
So they didn't do it for her. I had to call the bank president, right, in my area, who connected me with the bank president in her area. And I had to literally tell the bank president, who told me, point blank told me, inside of that branch, inside of that environment, there is a policy that do not waive NSF fees. And I go, I don't understand. I literally had a problem last year, and I had 26 of them. They waived every last one of them.
So you believe that yours was waived because you're white and not because you're black?
100%.
So Joe, how is it that when I overdrew and I tried to fight it, I was rejected with my bank? Well, I'm white, right? If we're going to talk about systemic racism, I can understand if you can point to individual bank tellers who are making racist decisions. But when we're talking about systemic racism, as we just pulled up, those are the 5 institutions that the left talks about: banking, housing, criminal justice, public health, and education.
Max,
systemic racism is the idea. I just let you talk for 5 minutes. You're going to let me respond. Systemic racism is the idea that there are laws, regulations in place to perpetuate the things you're talking about.
100%.
But how can that be when there's FDIC regulations, when there's Treasury Department regulations, right, that prohibit discrimination in banking on the basis of your race, gender, creed, sex?
Because the government actually follows the rules they put in place all the time. I mean, they don't break rules.
No. It's one thing to say that the law is being broken. And you mentioned that other banks have been caught doing this and they've paid fines and they've been punished for it.
Right.
It's one thing to say that the law is being broken or it's being not enforced as heavily as it should be. But the fact that you said that banks have been punished for it suggests it is being enforced. And you can't have systemic racism when every single law dealing with banking includes a non-discrimination part in the statute. So, like, we looked at what happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where they
I can't even believe I'm having a conversation with you about how you think that that somewhere along the line that there's not systemic racism just because the government says you can't have systemic racism.
Well, no. Systemic racism is the idea that the system itself, let's put up image number 3 again. It's the idea that the system itself is perpetuating racism within these 5 institutions.
100%.
Housing. So, but how can 100%. The system, the regulatory authority, be perpetuating racism when the regulatory authority is explicitly prohibiting racism?
Well, hold on, time out. You think that banking, because the banking institution gets away with racism, but because the government has a rule that's set up that says you can't be racist and it's not systemically racist?
Joe, I went out of my way today to go in depth into these definitions because the definitions matter, and I want to go in depth so we're not talking past each other, having different definitions. The
ongoing racial inequalities maintained by society.
By society,
right?
So who could possibly maintain the entire banking industry? That's the federal
government. The banking
government.
Industry? No. Bull.
No, the banking industry is the institution.
No. The banking industry is
the banking industry is the institution.
Correct. It is the institution.
Systemic is above institution. So the only thing above the banking industry is
the
federal
that's not true. That's not true.
Public opinion.
The system of banking is set up to be inherently racist. You could tell me it's not. Okay,
no, you had to go all the way up to the president of the branch. If you had more privileges because you were white, the minute you asked, you should have gotten it. You got it because you went and you kept pushing.
No,
you can't. It's not apples. It's apples and oranges.
You're wrong.
If you had special privileges, the minute you showed your white face, you would have had it revoked. That's what we're talking about. If she only had that happen to her because she's black, then the minute you went in as a white man and advocated, if that was truly systemic or institutional racism, it should have been fixed. What you're talking about is that her branch says that they won't do that. Joe, we just saw in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where banks were literally ransacked, literally looted, not burned to the ground, but destroyed. There are other conditions at play here that can lead an inner city bank to want to recoup money. I mean, for the very reason that as soon as there's a riot, they're the ones targeted.
No,
right?
listen.
You can't say that she only did that because she was black. There's just no evidence for that.
Listen.
There's just no evidence.
Yes, there is. There is actually evidence because he actually told me that they didn't know who you were, quote unquote.
Let's take the image off the screen.
That's what they said.
How can it be systemic racism if every law on the book, every government regulation, every rule in the bank itself would have been broken if that was true?
It is broken every day.
All
right, let's talk about big pharma.
Racism. It sounds like it's interpersonal racism.
No, but you won't let me finish because you just want to talk over me, Max.
I let you talk for 5 minutes.
Just shut. Just shut.
No, I'm not just shutting.
Here's the thing you don't understand. I'm not wrong.
How can it be systemic racism when the system governing the banking institution says you're not allowed to do it? And when anyone's caught doing it, they're fined or penalized. To be systemic, you'd have to be encouraging. There is examples of systemic racism. Apartheid in South Africa was systemic racism. The system itself said that whites and blacks are different. We've had it in our country, right? Separate but equal. Black kids go to one school, white kids go to another school. That was the system itself was designed to be racist. What I'm saying is the system, the banking system, the government regulations that govern the banking system are not inherently racist. They are governed by non-discrimination policies, non-discrimination statutes. Now, if those statutes are violated, that is an interpersonal example of racism because that person has violated the individual thing. If there's an unwritten rule that the bank just doesn't waive it for black people, that's an institutional problem. And that institution needs to be fixed. But to say it's systemic
Max, you're wrong.
is to say that it's actually being encouraged.
You're wrong. It is being encouraged. It is being encouraged.
How is it being encouraged that when it's found, they're punished?
When you get to the place where I am, when you get to the place where you can have the conversations I can have with certain people in society, when you can get to those places where they can't see my family, when they just look at me and they tell me things and do things and say things, right? When you can get to that point and have those experiences, and you could tell me that some definition doesn't exist in real life for blacks, because it does.
I don't deny your experience.
No, you don't deny it, but you think that you know better than what I do, and I lived it.
Yes.
There's millions of people like me that lived it, and there's millions of black people.
You did not live inside the Treasury Department. You did not live inside the Treasury Department.
No.
Your experience as an individual is not the system.
No,
I understand. I
Max,
understand the feeling that when something goes against you, you feel like the system's against you. We've had institutional and systemic racism in banking in this country. In the Jim Crow South, blacks were physically removed from banking institutions because those banking institutions would only accept white money. That is systemic racism, and they had laws on the books allowing it. If you were a black man trying to go into a white bank, you got kicked out of the bank.
You know everything, Max.
That's an example.
You know everything. You know everything because you've never had the experience. And what I'm trying to get to in the end part of what I was trying to say, which you constantly interrupt me when I try to talk, because I can't get the full all the way through. I can't get through the entire thought process. No, you can't because you won't shut up. So just shut up and let me finish. Right? So when I talk about the fact that there's systemic racism, the end part of this is that it all comes down to personal experience. All of it. Every bit of it. But if you would listen to the whole thing, you would understand that it is personal. That systemic racism is in the eye of the beholder. It is in the person that goes through.
That's why we're doing. Okay. That's why we're doing the definitions.
Just be quiet. Systemic racism. It doesn't matter if you believe there is no systemic racism. I can point to over and over and over again things that would lead me to believe there's systemic racism. Now, can I get past it? Yes. Did I finally get through what could have been an individual decision to discriminate against my sister? Yes, I could. But if you think you're going to hang your hat on an if or an or a then and get to the actual definition as if it's black and white, you're not going to be able to do it. You're not going to get anybody to come to the table to identify or deal with the problems of individual racism or individual selectivity. You're not going to be able to get there because you're trying to hold your own that by definition it's not systemic. Systemic to them and systemic to somebody else that goes through it is different than your definition you pull out of a dictionary.
But that's why I'm going to great lengths to use the same definition. So we're not. I
understand, but you will lose everyone at hello. You will lose everyone at hello if you try telling me that there aren't racist tendencies in each one of those areas.
Let me ask you this. How is our banking institution institutionally or systemically racist if there are loan programs that are subsidized by the federal government that are only available to minority-owned business owners? There are federally subsidized loan programs that if I walked into that bank and said I would like to apply for this loan, they would turn me away purely on the basis of my skin color. How can the institution be racist when, I mean, that is an example of institutional racism, but how can it be white privilege within this institution if there are programs set up to benefit minority?
Totally different, right?
No,
you're talking about something totally different.
How can the banking institution be anti-black if a black person can walk in and get a loan at a lower interest rate using a federally subsidized program that I can't have access to purely because of my skin color?
Right.
That's the problem I have. Our laws are in place not only to guarantee, to mandate non-discrimination, but the laws and programs are actually set up to benefit minority community because of the systemic problems I mentioned in the past, where 100%. You went to a white bank, you were kicked out.
What I'm trying to tell you, Max, is if you back up on this, right, you're not going to be able to change the perception of an entire group of people who have the similar experience because it's happening in their neighborhood, in their environment, because that's all they can see. They've never gotten the opportunity to get outside of that area, so it doesn't look like they have the experience. It looks like systemic racism to them. It looks like it. It appears.
We are going to talk about systemic racism as a definition of the system. The fact that they are talking about what they experience in their neighborhood is fine and good. But it is fundamentally flawed to try and define the system as a whole by what is experienced in one neighborhood. There's a problem with that. Systemic means the whole. It means the governing body over the institutions, which is not only just the government, but it's also public opinion, right? To say that systemic racism exists means that the government's allowing it and the public is okay with it.
Okay.
You can't say that banking is racist against black people when there are special opportunities afforded to black people that aren't available to white people. Do you want to go through another one of the institutions? We have 4 more.
What I want to concentrate on here, specifically, what I want to concentrate on here is perception, and why perception is reality to people who have to go through this. Like, look, as a guy that has accomplished quite, as a guy that's gone through quite a bit in my life and done quite a bit, right? I don't think that I have white privilege. I don't think I have white privilege. I don't. My perception is I don't have white privilege. What we should be talking about is if a whole group of people feels that systemic racism is real, if they feel that way, right? It may absolutely not be true.
I mean, it goes back to what we hear from people like Ben Shapiro, which is facts don't care about the feelings. This is a problem on the left. If someone feels it strongly enough, that makes it a fact. So they can have racism in their communities. I don't doubt it. But to say that it's systemic, say that there's this puppet master pulling the strings, and the reason they didn't get a bank loan is because there's some white Confederate good old boy pulling the strings, just isn't true.
With that. So just so you know, feelings do drive culture, right? It doesn't need to be real to be real. It doesn't need to be, and I guess that's the biggest thing that I want to bring to the forefront. I think it's an excuse. I think it's a muled excuse for failure, right? I really do. I think that there are ways to get around and point out those individual bad actors. The same way I talk about police. There's ways to individually point out those bad actors. But when the bank is actually making an extra $300 or $400, that individual opportunity for that person to say, no, you're going to have to pay that, benefits the benefactor, which is the bank.
Do you think that you were able to get farther on getting your sister's overdraft charge reversed? Do you think you got farther because you had a history of larger deposits than she did?
100%.
Do you really think you don't think it has anything to do with
100%.
economic status?
I 100%. I think that I did get further because of my deposits.
So do you think that
I leveraged those deposits and said, if you're not going to,
exactly.
I'm taking all my money out if you don't take or give her $250 back.
That's socioeconomic. That's not race.
Jimmy, stick it. I'm not a virtue signaler. I'm a guy that's been through a lot. Right? No, this guy Jimmy on the deal. I'm a virtue signaler.
Like,
anyone knows me knows I'm not a virtue signaler.
In order for it to be,
and anyone that knows, and anyone that also knows,
institutions.
Yeah.
In order for it to be racism within the banking industry, you'd have to be able to say that there are poor white people who are paycheck to paycheck, they overdraw, and that they automatically get their stuff back because they're white.
No.
I don't think that exists.
That's not what I'm saying. Again, you've skipped over everything. This is the whole argument. You've skipped over all the facts of what it means to have systemic racism to the people that are actually talking about it. And I'm not talking about the left that's actually, it doesn't matter if your perception of and or definition is not systemic.
It does.
All right. Then you're never going to get through to the problem. You're never going to get to the point where you can actually have them admit that this is not just against you. You're not going to be able to get there because to them, that's all they see.
Image number 2, this is some of the leading definitions of racism. I put up Ben and Jerry's ice cream since they're the second result in Google. But it also says that there are systems and structures that have procedures or processes that disadvantage African Americans. That's the president of the NAACP. And then this guy, Glenn Harris, president of Race Forward. The complex interaction of culture, policy, and institutions that hold in place the outcomes we see in our lives. Systemic racism is naming the process of white supremacy.
Yes, I don't believe any of that.
So here's the problem. Here's the problem. You can take that image off the screen too. The problem is that the left, everyone else is using one definition. I'm here trying to prove that definition wrong, and you're arguing me because you have a different idea. That's why I went out of my way to define everything.
But when you break up my conversation and stop me before I get all the way through it, you don't actually know what I thought. So now we have one side of it that says, oh, Joe believes in systemic racism, when I'm trying to explain through the entire process that systemic racism, by definition, by the definition you give, does not exist. But by definition of what they feel in their community, the perception they feel in their community does exist to them because that's what they've been told, just like Juneteenth, right? What does Juneteenth mean? What is the actual meaning of Juneteenth?
It's the city of Galveston, Texas, learned about the Emancipation Proclamation 1001 days
what are they saying Juneteenth is?
It's like the Black 4th of July.
Correct. Is it the Black 4th of July?
No.
No. But have they created Juneteenth to be the Black 4th of July?
They're trying to.
Right.
They're trying to. So 100%. If you agree that there isn't systemic racism in banking, if you look at any of these other, throw up image number 3 on the screen again, do you believe that there's systemic racism in any of those other 4 institutions, housing, criminal justice, public health, or education?
From my perspective, right, by definition, systemic racism does not exist at all. but by the definition of the people being muled into the idea that it does exist.
I'm using their definitions.
Now listen, in their perception, it doesn't mean if it's their definition. Look up Juneteenth. It says nothing about Black 4th of July. That's not what it says, right? It's not a Black
Joe,
Independence Day. It's not.
You go into an Antifa rally, you go into a black community, and you show up the definition that I'm using, they will all agree with it. They do believe that there's some good old boy from the South pulling the puppet strings, and that's
Yep.
why they didn't get a bank loan.
Yep.
Right? We talk about housing. Housing is one of the things that they said there's systemic racism because the people who are landlords don't rent to black tenants.
Right. 100%.
The problem is it's not systemic because HUD actually has grants that are only available for black and minority housing.
So this is what I get down to, Max, when I start talking specifically about systemic racism, and that is that they've redefined how they see systemic racism. They
created this definition.
Okay, it doesn't matter. If you walk into a community and you actually use that definition, they won't even know what it means, right? They'll say to them, system, okay, the man is the person that's actually renting me the house, right? They will literally look at these.
Sorry, keep going.
They will literally look at every aspect of being blocked as not personal accountable. They're not personally accountable for it, right? That it's all because someone else doesn't want them to have something. And yes, Josh just said that, hey, truth does not equal, or perception does not equal reality. He's true. It's true. It doesn't. Except for when you have scholars, right, education systems that are literally convincing people through the separation of definition and reality. They've built a gap between it, and then they've connected that gap through the reality that they're not connected. So the problem that we have is not the fact that systemic by definition does not exist. The problem is that they're walking around muling systemic racism into every corner of our society by using this white noise as systemic racism,
Yeah.
right? They're going past it in order to create a justification for the fact that it exists.
The reason that we are having this discussion on the left's turf using leftist definitions is
It is
because
a
they
circular
created.
argument. Sure,
The reason that we're having this discussion is because the left invented this. This is the definition that the left uses. To say that, oh, that's a bad definition, we should have this one, that's a losing argument because you are going up against a side that has already decided what their battlefield is going to be. They've decided that there's systemic racism, that when people have things done bad to them, they are taught that the reason you didn't get a bank loan, the reason you didn't get into college, the reason you couldn't find an affordable house, the reason that you have diabetes and can't get treatment, right? The reason that more blacks are in prison than whites. They are saying that the reason for that is systemic, and that definition matters. That is what they're claiming. They are claiming it's systemic. Again, I can point to the Jim Crow South, where systemic racism actually existed. Where if you were convicted of a crime, even before you were convicted of a crime, if you were just accused of a crime and you were black, you were lynched. I can prove that is systemic injustice when it comes to the justice system in the Jim Crow South.
So listen to me. You just put up a definition of systemic racism, right? And we had this conversation before. And how they get around the definition in order to justify the fact that it exists is by taking that definition, right, and changing it, altering it, even if just by a minute or a couple of words. So here's a definition that was put in USA Today. And this was, I think, a couple months ago. Nope, I'm sorry, that was today. This is the one that was today. So this was written, what is systemic racism? Johnson defined systemic racism, also called structural racism or institutional racism, as systems and structures that have procedures or processes that disadvantage African Americans. Right? Is that the same definition that you just gave me?
Josh, put up image number 2.
It's not. It's not. They add things.
It is exactly what I just said. You literally just read the quote that I threw up.
That have procedures and processes that disadvantage African American.
You literally just repeated the quote.
Procedures and processes. Look, what I'm saying is,
if we're on the same page, we're on the same page.
Well, we're talking past each other. What I'm telling you is,
what was the quote you just read?
It was from
Was
Alfred
it that same quote?
No.
It wasn't Derek Johnson, NAACP president?
Yep.
Okay, so that's why I want to go after the definitions, Because we can't have a discussion and say that systemic racism doesn't exist, but it does if you redefine systemic racism like this, because they're not fighting the battle on those terms.
But they are. They are fighting the battle on those terms. Yeah,
they actually believe that there's some power structure that's keeping them down, and that if only the American government American society was less racist, there'd be more Black Americans as homeowners. That's what they're saying.
Well, racism is an individual by itself, is an individual action, right? If you're racist, you could be racist, black, white, green, purple, have webbed feet. I mean, racism is not just individualized.
They also say that you can't be racist and black. They also say that.
That's not true. That's not true. You can be racist and be black. You can be racist and be Asian. You can be racist and be anything. I mean, racism is not just hey, you're white, so you're racist. No, there's plenty of black racists. Plenty.
Yeah.
Plenty.
I look at that, and that's why we're using their terms. I look at that wheel that we throw up. Public health. Public health is not institutionally racist because there's extra dollars beyond what the regular population gets. Extra dollars. There's an office within HHS for minority health. There is no office for white people health. It just doesn't exist. There's an office for minority health. To say that HHS and the system as a whole is inherently systematically racist just isn't true. Education, there's affirmative action. It is easier to get into a higher a place of higher learning, a university or college, if you are black than if you are white. If all things are considered equal, it is easier to get in if you're black because of affirmative action policies.
Correct.
Right? So that's what I'm talking about. The idea that when you don't get what you want or life has you down, that it's because of the system. Like you talked about banking. I see that as a socioeconomic problem. Unless you can point to white people who are absolved of that in the same socioeconomic situation, I see that as a socioeconomic problem. Unless you can prove to me that there are white people who get overdrafts and purely on the basis of their skin, they get their money back. I mean, there are times where I've done overdrafts all digitally, emailed. Mm-hmm. And yeah, sure, my last name is McGuire, and you can, unless I'm black Irish or something, you can presume that I'm white. But not all of these systems, a lot of these systems are automated, right? There's no automated system saying, oh, if we think this person is black. Like when I applied for a mortgage, they didn't even ask me what my race was.
Yeah.
It was race blind. The forums actually went out of their way to not list my race. So, I mean, that's the problem. We see excuses being given for things not going well or people being felt like they're being kept down. And I'm not doubting their experiences. I'm not doubting what they've experienced. But to put it on some man in the high castle who's pulling the puppet strings, and that's why they're down. If only the system was less racist. I can point to systemic racism in apartheid South Africa. I can point to it in the Jim Crow South, but we just don't live in that today.
Okay. So, yeah, so Sherry says it's a class issue which affects all races. I agree with that. But here's the thing I want to talk about. It doesn't matter if it does or does not exist for you. It does or does not exist for me. It doesn't matter if by definition I don't think systemic racism exists or you don't think systemic racism exists. They're using that argument in order to create opportunity and chaos, right, for change, to give them more opportunity, to give them more of what is available by our government. Right? They want them to step in and move the goalpost just a little bit further in the direction that gives them more opportunity. That's what they want. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I can understand that. I just have a problem with assigning systemic racism to it because that's the implication. It's not a zero-sum game. The implication is that if a black person doesn't get a mortgage, I only got a mortgage because I'm white. That's what the implication is when they say systemic racism.
100%. And it doesn't go back to the fact that they didn't pay attention in school and skipped school and didn't graduate high school and decided they didn't want to work. I mean, that all the personal choices you made don't come into play, right? Because the excuse is that now that I didn't do all that and didn't work for anything and didn't do the things I was supposed to do, now all of a sudden the system's against me.
And that's the problem. So we again started talking past each other. That's why I wanted to dial in on those definitions. Because once we get the definitions down pat, we are in relative agreement, right? Once you get the definitions down pat and we don't argue over that, we're in agreement that there's not some puppet master over.
There is not some puppet master. I would agree there's no puppet master. But what I would also agree is that we do at some point have to deal with perception. We have to be able to fight this with a at least some sort of argument in the middle that allows them to say, hey, we understand you feel this way, but this is the reality, right? We don't get anywhere if we stop and say, hey, listen, we're not even going to listen to the argument. We can say, I can understand how you feel that way. We miss people because we draw a wall right away, and we don't actually go back and talk about the things that the personal choices they made in order to get there. It is a class system. But my problem is this. I talked about my personal experience, Max, because I went through it. And had I not had enough education, had I not been able to go through and actually experience more and more things and understand that it is very individual, right? It's not that I can't assume that everyone that I run into is going to have the same sort of character, right? If I always assume that everyone has the character of the experience I had before, I'm never going to actually have a different experience than the one that I had that I didn't like the first time. Does that make any sense?
But the problem is that when we see ground to the people who put feelings over facts, when we see ground to the people who truly believe that they're being kept down by systemic racism, when they say that, as I said, when they say there's systemic racism in banking, what they're saying is that I only have a mortgage because I'm white. And that if I was black, I wouldn't have a mortgage. All the other things being equal, I wouldn't have a mortgage, which is a little strange. I don't know how any black people own a home at that point, but that's what they're arguing. So we can't just say, oh, well, your definition's wrong. Oh, well, we're just let's talk about this instead, because their assertion of systemic racism is inherently racist because it is not presuming it's presuming a zero-sum game, right? It is presuming the idea that if they lose, some other race is winning, and that if they were to win, the other race would lose. That it's that you owe them something because you are privileged because of your whiteness. And that is why you got into college. That is why you're not in prison. That's why you have a bank loan, right? That's why you have a house. That's why you're healthy. That's the argument that they're making. So we can't see ground there because their assertion is inherently racist, whether they realize it or not discounting what they experience in their neighborhoods. But to say that white America or that the federal government is racist, white supremacy is what's keeping them down, it's hogwash.
Well,
it's hogwash.
It's only hogwash because, and again, it's only hogwash because we're looking at it on its face. We're not looking at it from the perception that they have built into this. It's almost like, it's almost as if we agree it doesn't exist, but we can't agree that they don't think it exists because they're living in an environment where they can't experience anything but what they're experiencing, right? Because they're going to treat every person they come into contact with that they're out to get them. Right, that they're out to take from them.
We've had conversations where I've had run-ins with the cops, and I feel they're out to get me. You've had situations where you've dealt with.
Well,
township.
You definitely have done that, right?
Well, you've also had situations where you dealt with your township, and you went right after the board.
And I won.
The actual, I know, but to say that it's a leap. There is a leap in everything. Like I blame structural powers for things all the time, right? Oh, damn Obama. Right? Like everyone does it, but it is a leap. The idea that if I get pulled over, it's because the chief of police has a policy to pull me over. I don't believe it, right? If something happens, it isn't necessarily just because the mayor wants it to happen.
Right.
We all do that.
It's easy to get sucked into it, right? It's easy to get sucked into to someone being against you individually. Right? It's easy.
The difference is that this is being wrapped up in a Malcolm X kind of black power argument.
No question.
That's the difference. That's the difference.
No question. No question. But my issue is, how do we solve the problem? How do we get from one to the other? How do we actually convince a group of people that is actually saying, oh, that makes sense to me. I don't have to take personal accountability anymore. It's your problem. You did this to me. How do you get past that?
You have to start by convincing them that the reason that they didn't get this is not because they're black. There's other factors at play. You say good luck. How can we ever move on if everyone thinks that they should be getting more and they're only getting less because they're black? That's a sense of entitlement that you cannot get around.
100%.
That is the same sense of entitlement that demands reparations. You can't get around that. You have to fight that battle first, because at the heart of every argument you're going to have is the belief that they don't have as much as they have actually deserved, and that you've kept something from them because of their skin color, whether that's an overdraft charge or whatever you want to call it. You have to disarm that, and honestly, it's easily done. It's easily done because I can point to white people who are in the same economic situation who have overdrafts. I've had overdrafts when I was college and barely had a penny to my name in my bank account. Right? I've had overdrafts. You have had overdrafts.
I'm still stuck on the fact that it's easy to convince people who believe they're the victim that they're no longer the victim. I'm waiting for that one. I'm going to grab some popcorn real quick.
That's the whole war on poverty. The war on poverty has been an abysmal failure.
Correct.
That's been the idea that we just need to throw money at the problem. It hasn't made anyone better, because we can go through all of them. And I mentioned the things with HUD, with banking. There are programs set up to make it easier for minority business owners and minorities to get things that white people cannot, in an attempt to basically correct for systemic racism of the past. That's the design of things like affirmative action, minority business grants, etc. I don't understand how you get beyond that, because they keep wanting more. And no matter what you give them, no matter what programs you say, they're still saying that the problem's systemic.
So this gets me to a question or something that somebody said. KT says, people are not racist. Most folks don't like a-holes no matter what color of their skin. I agree with that 100%, right? I agree with that. And do you know why most people actually fight the idea that racism is a problem? You know why they fight it? It's because they're not racist, because most people aren't racist. Most people accept people where they are, right? So it's not, to me, it's not, it's a perception that's built. And so they want to say that, it's because, white people say that they aren't racist, that they're just racist because they don't know they're racist. No, we're just not racist. And the people that are racist, well, we know that they're racist. But I also know that there are some people that are racist that don't talk about being racist. They're just inherently racist, but they're quiet about being racist. But that's a problem you're going to deal with no matter where you are. I mean, these are stumbling blocks that you have to deal with. And I think that's my issue, is that how do you get past the victimhood, Max? How do we get past the point where everyone stops being victims, pulls their bootstraps up, right? Actually gets to work, get things done, and then making sure they're not virtue signaling, as I was just called a virtue signaler, right? Because I didn't get to finish what I had to say. Got me all wild up. But how do you get past that to where people are like, I'm not a racist and I support you, right? I mean, I just don't know how much difference that makes, right? I just don't.
You either convince them that they're wrong, or you pretend that they're right, give in to their demands, and then you're back in the same situation a generation later.
And that's what we're doing right now. We're doing that in Seattle. We're doing that all over the place. And then you have Burkina Faso or whatever, the home of quite a bit of genocide, right? And ethnic cleansing and all sorts of other things that are going on there. Virtue signaling from there, saying, hey, we know better than you. I mean, your country's a mess. And you're going to tell us that you know better than us? Really? Oh, come on. But that's my problem, is that we've created platforms. We have entire platforms that are trying to sound good, but don't do good. They divide. And we've allowed it to happen. We've allowed them literally to walk into our society, create perceptions, or take a perception and grow that perception based on turning someone into a victim, rather than taking that person and making them personally accountable. They're just not accountable. They weren't accountable when they showed up to school. And by the way, they might be a victim of how they grew up, right? They might not. I've seen plenty of people out there that are just an absolute train wreck who came up in a good family. They made personal choices to be a train wreck. They made personal choices not to go to school. They made personal choices to skip school, to drop out, to do drugs. Max, I have a big problem with everything we do in our society that treats people who've made bad decisions for 25 years as if we should feel sorry for them. That's my problem. But we hide behind people making bad decisions and we don't believe in tough love. Now that's inhumane now. So I think we have a bigger issue that we have to address at some point. I mean, the white elephant in the room, or black elephant, or green elephant, whatever you want to call it, pink elephant, right? Oh man, Joe, you call it a white elephant. Why couldn't it be black? Well, because they're green.
Well, that's what I said. Pot calling the kettle black. I made the same mistake, and I mean that's what we have to have the discussion about. Not even talking about your sister, but there are other things at play here when someone doesn't get their overdraft thing refunded. It's how much money they put into the bank, right? Their history of deposits, how much money the bank has made off of them. There are other things at play than just their skin color. And the problem is that it's so easy in the black community to just jump to this, that, it's because I'm black.
But I jumped to it too, which is what I was trying to get to on the whole situation with my sister. Like, I jumped right into it. I assumed that my sister, I did. Like, I didn't even address the problem the way I should have addressed it. I didn't move it up the ladder the right way. I mean, this was me. I acted like an idiot. And what I was trying to tell you is that, in my perception, it's because she was black. I went straight back to when I was a kid, right? I just assumed that they were out to get my sister because my sister's black, right? And it wasn't until I went all the way up the ladders, that I realized that, okay, it is an economic thing. It's in that economic area. But they don't care if you're black, white, green, yellow, purple. They don't care. If you don't have money, they're going to get more money from you. They're just going to do it because you're in that place where there's not a whole lot you can do about it, right? Make sure you balance your checkbook better. But I went straight to race. I went to racism, right? And I don't even know if that was true. I don't know if it was true. So the point is I think people just make assumptions, and so it makes it really easy for the left to create these perceptions. It makes it really easy. They can make up whatever perception they want. And someone can say, I don't have to be accountable. Oh my gosh, thank goodness. It's someone else's fault. Whew. Oh my gosh. I'm going to blame this one, Sherry. I have one less shirt, Sherry, because of you. And it's all your fault, Sherry. We had to send you a shirt. Because I lost that bet. But if you would have never made me make that bet, I would have never lost that shirt. And it's all your fault, Sherry. It's all your fault.
Well, that's a good segue.
I had to say that because we had a T-shirt.
That's a good segue to mention the sponsor of today's episode. It is, of course, the Conservative Daily Store. Today's T-shirt of the day is our systemic racism, our leftist definition of racism T-shirt, which is racist, noun, anyone who defeats a liberal in a political argument. So check this out. The link is in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions below. If you like it, you want to support the podcast, pick one up, you can do so there.
So Sherry says, I'm confused. I was just actually cracking a joke, Sherry, because we've seen you here before, and we sent you a new T-shirt. And,
we're sending it today.
Yeah, we're sending it today. I think you have to tell us what type of shirt you want. But
No, I got that. I
you
got
did?
that.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah.
So I was just saying that I was making fun of the fact that it's your fault that we sent you a free shirt. I was being funny. It wasn't that funny, I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny for me, but it's a little bit funny.
Yeah. Well, any final words as we wrap this up?
You know, I think that we talked past each other. You see how easy it was for us to talk past each other?
Joe, I went out of my way to start with the definition, so we'd be on the same page.
I know, but I was trying to
went out of my way.
I was trying to get through a bit of experience, right? That I have that the people use. They use those experiences. And somebody actually said that that you're not a victim of your environment. You have PTSD and a bunch of other stuff. I agree with that as well. That soldiers they go through a lot as well, and everyone has a cross to bear. Everyone, but making people making it special that you have a different cross, I think is disingenuous to what really life is all about.
Yeah, well, the resolution is that you understand that you jump to racism too. It's so easy. It's so easy to do it.
100%.
But it doesn't mean that there is systemic racism. Well, I know there was a lot of action in the comment section, but that's going to be it for this edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. Remember that we live stream on Facebook and YouTube every day, so check us out there. Also, check us out at Apple Podcasts as well as the Google Play Store. You can also find us on the Podbean app as well as conservative-daily.com/podcast. Do subscribe. Listen, leave your comments. Tell us what you think. It really helps as we try and guide the future episodes, what we're going to cover. So again, my name is Max McGuire.
And this is Joe Otto.
And remember that the fight to take back our country isn't over, but the only way we win is if we all stand together.